On World News Tonight, a new president. The next president-elect of Bangladesh was elected by the country's election commission by default. Danger on the horizon? The United States asks all its citizens to leave Russia as soon as possible. More deaths. Turkey and Syria death toll rises as more aid enters the country. And tying the knot. Couples get married on Valentine's Day in the presence of elephants in Thailand.
This is Derana World News Tonight. Reporting from Colombo, here is Suzanne Shanali.
Good evening and thank you for joining us on World News, where we bring to you latest updates from around the globe. Now we start off tonight with updates from our neighboring Bangladesh, where Mohammad Shahabuddin Chuppu has been declared as the next president-elect by the country's election commission after no other candidate was put forward. Speaking to reporters in the capital Dhaka, election commissioner Qazi Habibul Awal said that the ruling Awami League party's nominee was elected unopposed as the 22nd president. With 302 members, the AL party has the majority in the 350-seat national parliament, and no other party had the numbers to nominate a presidential candidate. Born in 1949 and hailing from the northern Pabna district, retired district judge, Shahabuddin also served as a member of the AL's advisory council, a freedom fighter of the country's independence war in 1971. He also served as commissioner of the country's autonomous body Anti-Corruption Commission. Shahabuddin will replace the incumbent Abdul Hamid, whose tenure expired on April 24th. According to the country's constitution, the presidential election must be held 60 to 90 days before the expiry of each 5-year term. Hamid cannot become president again as he was elected for 2 terms according to the country's constitution. India's markets regulator has confirmed that it is investigating allegations made by Hindenburg Research against companies owned by multi-billionaire Gautam Adani.
The Securities and Exchange Board of India says it is examining market activity around the report. Mr. Adani's business empire had over $100 billion wiped off its stock market value after the claims of market manipulation and financial fraud. Adani Group has so far denied the claims. On Monday, SEBI said in a Supreme Court filing that it was studying the allegations and the market activity immediately preceding and post the publication of the report. Also on Monday, Adani Group moved to reassure investors by saying that it had strong cash flows and its business plans were fully funded. The conglomerate's flagship company Adani Enterprises is due to announce quarterly earnings later on Tuesday. Mr. Adani's group has 7 publicly traded companies which operate across a wide range of sectors, including commodities, trading, airports, utilities, ports, and renewable energy. Last month, a report by US-based short seller Hindenburg Research alleged that Adani Group companies had engaged in decades of brazen stock manipulation and accounting fraud. It also claimed its companies had substantial debt which put the entire group on a precarious financial footing.
The Philippines accused China's Coast Guard of trying to block one of its vessels supporting a resupply mission for troops stationed on a atoll in the disputed South China Sea by directing a military-grade laser at crew on the ship.
In a statement, the Philippine Coast Guard said the incident took place at the Second Thomas Shoal when a Chinese Coast Guard vessel directed the laser at its ship, causing temporary blindness to crew on the bridge and making dangerous maneuvers. Philippines Department of Foreign Affairs spokesperson Teresita Daza said in a statement that these acts of regression by China were disturbing and disappointing, noting that Philippine President Ferdinand Marcos Jr. had recently concluded a state visit to China. Daza said that during the visit, Marcos Jr. and Chinese President Xi Jinping had agreed to manage maritime differences in the South China Sea through diplomacy and dialogue. The official Philippine state-owned media reported in a tweet that the China Coast Guard had also engaged in dangerous maneuvers that risked a collision, adding that such behavior constituted a threat to the sovereignty and security of the Philippines and infringed on the country's rights and jurisdictions over its exclusive economic zone. China has become increasingly assertive over its claim to the South China Sea, developing military bases on rocky outcrops and deploying the Coast Guard. The PCG reiterated that it will continue to support and protect the sovereignty and rights of the Philippines and the troops on board the Sierra Madre. The Philippines recently agreed to allow the US access to more of its military bases under the Enhanced Defense Cooperation Agreement between the two countries.
Diplomats from Seoul, Tokyo and Washington have renewed calls for Pyongyang to surrender its nuclear ambitions. Also on the sidelines of the trilateral talk, delegates from here and neighboring Japan sat down to address their differences over compensation for forced labor victims.
South Korea and Japan's first vice foreign ministers sat down in Washington on Monday to discuss the ongoing dispute over compensation for Korean victims of Japan's wartime forced labor. After the meeting, South Korea's first vice foreign minister Cho Hyun-dong told reporters that the two sides have yet to reach an agreement. Cho said that more consultations will be needed with Japan, calling the situation a very sensitive issue for both countries. Last month, Seoul unveiled plans to compensate the victims through its own public foundation. But this prompted backlash from the victims, who insist the issue cannot be resolved without sincere apologies and participation from the Japanese companies involved. Pundits say talks on the matter will likely continue on the sidelines of a foreign ministers' meeting at the Munich Security Conference later this week. The latest talks followed a trilateral meeting between the vice foreign ministers of South Korea, the United States, and Japan, where the three countries reaffirmed their commitment to cooperating against threats from North Korea. Speaking at a joint press briefing after the sit-down in Washington, South Korea's representative said they will enhance their security cooperation to counter growing threats from Pyongyang. The remarks come as Sherman said North Korea continued to threaten South Korea and the world with an unprecedented number of ballistic missile launches last year. Stressing their trilateral relationship is strong and growing stronger day by day, Sherman reiterated that their alliance is both ironclad and vital to regional and global security.
The United States has warned its citizens to leave Russia immediately or risk wrongful detention or conscription to fight in Ukraine. In a new travel warning, the State Department said Russia may refuse to acknowledge U.S.-Russia dual citizenship. The warning added that U.S. citizens had already been interrogated without cause and threatened.
The United States has told its citizens to leave Russia immediately, citing the ongoing war in Ukraine and a risk of arbitrary arrest or harassment by Russian law enforcement agencies. The Kremlin said it was not the first time US citizens had been asked to leave Russia. The last such public warning was in September after President Vladimir Putin ordered a partial mobilization. The US Embassy in Moscow said in a statement, quote, "Russian security services have arrested US citizens on spurious charges, singled out US citizens in Russia for detention and harassment, denied them fair and transparent treatment, and convicted them in secret trials or without presenting credible evidence." The Federal Security Service said in January that prosecutors had opened a criminal case against a United States citizen on suspicion of espionage. Last December, US basketball star Brittany Griner was released in a prisoner swap. She had been sentenced to 9 years in a penal colony for possessing vape cartridges containing cannabis oil after a judicial process labelled a sham by Washington. Meanwhile, former US Marine Paul Whelan is serving a 16-year sentence in a Russian penal colony after being convicted of what Washington says are fictitious espionage charges.
We're going into a short commercial break now. We'll be back soon with more world news. Stay with us. Welcome back to World News Tonight. Now, New Zealand declared a national state of emergency for the third time in its history as Cyclone Gabrielle pounded the North Island with wind and rain knocking out power to tens of thousands of homes.
Roads across the north of New Zealand were submerged in floodwater on Tuesday after Cyclone Gabrielle lashed the region, bringing strong winds, heavy rain and huge ocean swells. The storm caused extensive flooding, landslides and damage to infrastructure, prompting the country to declare a national state of emergency. Only the third time in its history it has done so. Mobile phone services are down and some towns are cut off. Prime Minister Chris Hipkins said the extent of the damage was still being assessed.
It has been a very big night for New Zealanders across the country, but particularly in the upper North Island. I want to acknowledge the situation that New Zealanders have been waking up to this morning. A lot of families displaced, a lot of homes without power, extensive damage done across the country.
Gabrielle is 60 miles east of Auckland, near the east coast of the country's North Island, and is expected to move east-southeast, roughly parallel to the coast. Authorities have evacuated beach settlements and are still asking people to leave their homes as rivers continue to swell and the tide rises.
In Hawke's Bay, sheep were carried to safety from paddocks flooded with heavy rain. One local resident spoke of her distress. New Zealand's parliament will sit briefly on Tuesday afternoon, but will then be adjourned until February the 21st because of the cyclone.
Over in Turkey and Syria, the death toll continues to rise as rescuers search for survivors. The global community is sending aid to help the victims, but officials say more access points are needed in war-torn Syria.
A 10-year-old girl is finally pulled out from the rubble in Turkey's southern Hatay province after being trapped for 147 hours.
Bak güzel kızım, seni almaya geldik. Şu ayaklarını bir göreyim. Bakayım. Tamam, bir şey yok. Yanındayım, bak yanındayım.
Rescuers continue to work around the clock after 2 earthquakes rocked Turkey and Syria last week. The number of deaths has now reached at least 36,000. The Turkish Emergency Coordination Center said the death toll in Turkey is at over 31,000, while the Syrian government has confirmed around 4,500 deaths. But the United Nations has warned that the final number may double that.
Good or bad, everything we had was here. Even my children are crying now. They are saying, "Mom, everything is gone. Our childhood is gone. Our memories are all gone."
It's freezing and we freeze to death here. If we sit inside the tent, we'll freeze.
The international community is reaching out to help. The chief of the EU Commission, Ursula von der Leyen, has promised to bolster aid for Turkey by responding to its latest request for more shelter capacity. And a convoy of 10 United Nations aid trucks entered northwest Syria to deliver urgent supplies to quake-hit areas. U.S. Ambassador to the UN Linda Thomas-Greenfield on Sunday urged the UN Security Council to approve 2 additional access points to deliver aid to parts of Syria quicker, as it has been complicated to reach the region due to the long-running civil war. Meanwhile, the aftermath of the earthquakes is expected to worsen the cholera outbreak in Syria. The Syrian government first declared the outbreak last September, which was reportedly due to the country's war-ravaged water infrastructure. This means there was a perfect storm brewing before the earthquakes of increasing food insecurity, collapsing healthcare systems, the lack of access to safe water, and poor sanitation. The UN has estimated that 5.3 million people have been left homeless by the disaster in war-torn Syria.
Georgia this week is set to release portions of a special grand jury final report on its investigation into possible criminal interference in the state's 2020 general election, including by former President Donald Trump and his allies.
The public should be able to see parts of a special grand jury report on Donald Trump's efforts to overturn Georgia's 2020 presidential election, a state judge ruled on Monday, but not all of it. Recommendations on whether there should be criminal charges will stay secret, according to Fulton County Superior Court Judge Robert McBurney. The county's district attorney, Fonnie Willis, formed the special grand jury shortly after a January 2021 phone call in the waning days of Trump's term.
The Trump investigation is underway.
Trump urged Georgia's top election official to find enough votes to give him the critical swing state. The special grand jury's report could potentially serve as the basis for a prosecution of Trump, which would make him the first former president in U.S. history to face criminal prosecution. McBurney said the report's introduction, conclusion, and a part where the jury discusses concern about witnesses possibly lying under oath should all be made public.
Did you lie to them?
Senior Trump advisors such as attorney Rudy Giuliani and U.S. Senator Lindsey Graham were among the 75 witnesses jurors heard testimony from over about 7 months. Trump was not subpoenaed and did not testify. He has denied wrongdoing and accused Willis, an elected Democrat, of targeting him for political gain. The Georgia probe is just one of a number of civil and criminal investigations threatening him, his family, and his associates.
America's comeback starts right now.
Meanwhile, Trump's bid for the 2024 Republican presidential nomination is already underway.
Decisions are imminent.
It's up to Willis to decide whether to file criminal charges. Last month, she said decisions were imminent. At that time, she said she didn't want the report to come out, adding that future defendants could argue unsealing it would hurt their right to a fair trial. The county judge says there will be a few days for prosecutors to discuss with him if more redactions are needed. with the selected parts set to come out on Thursday.
European countries' bill to shield households and companies from soaring energy costs has climbed to nearly 800 billion euros, or about $850 billion, urging countries to be more targeted in their spending to tackle the energy crisis.
European countries have spent close to 800 billion euros to fight soaring energy costs. That's approaching $850 billion. The number came in a report Monday by Brussels-based think tank Bruegel. It said EU countries had now allocated around $727 billion in energy crisis spending, while Britain had allocated about $110 billion and Norway nearly $9 billion. Germany spent the most at $288 billion. The spending comes after Europe fell out with Russia. The Kremlin cut off most of its gas deliveries to the continent last year in retaliation for sanctions due to the war in Ukraine. That sent gas costs soaring, leading governments to look for ways to protect consumers from enormous energy bills. Bruegel's analysis showed spending on the energy crisis was now similar to the EU's recovery fund for the global health crisis, which hit €750 billion, or about $800 billion. It also comes as countries debate proposals to loosen state aid rules for green tech projects. That as Europe tries to compete with subsidies in the US and China.
Welcome back to World News Tonight, and for more news, let's take you around the world in a minute. Zhang Jun, China's permanent representative to the United Nations, pointed to harsh reality that sanctions are disseminated in the economic foundations, robbing many children of their right to development and right to survival, which are the most fundamental of human rights. A gunman opened fire in Michigan State University's main campus, killing 3 people and injuring 5, some severely, before he was found dead hours later, apparently from a self-inflicted gunshot. Aston Martin unveiled their 2023 Challenger in their brand new factory in Silverstone in the presence of their drivers Fernando Alonso and Lance Stroll. McLaren too unveiled their car in walking, with drivers Lando Norris and Oscar Piastri saying winning a race is not their target. North Korea celebrated the 81st birthday of its late leader Kim Jong-il with a fish cutting show and a cooking competition in the capital Pyongyang. Chefs were seen cooking as visitors watched and looked around the Pyongyang Noodle House, where a number of dishes were displayed. Ukrainian armed forces personnel taught by Polish, Norwegian and Canadian instructors have been learning how to operate and maintain the German-built Leopard 2 tanks as they prepare to receive donations of Western armor in the coming months. And that's all the news we got for you tonight. Join us again tomorrow for more news around the globe. And in case you missed to watch any of the stories we aired tonight, you can always rewatch by catching us on our YouTube channel, youtube.com/Derana English. Love is in the air in Thailand this Valentine's Day, as we leave you tonight with visuals of couples getting married in the presence of Thai elephants on the day devoted to love. Thank you for watching. Stay safe and have a good night.